Importing in the US, much more than what I export.
Is there no other way?
Tariffs. One of the fundamental issues for the West in general is the cost of labor. Trump said very clearly, it's in a very strict way, if any country decide to sell or invoice in any currency other than the dollar, they're going to be severely punished.
Dr. Bassem, thank you for joining me on today's episode.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Can you please give us a brief about yourself?
So recently, I'm the CEO of Global Economics and Finance Consulting. It's a boutique consultancy company, actually, who provide tailored advice to governments in the GCC and across the Middle East on all what is related to economic policy, economic reform, central banking reforms. And I had the pleasure of being the chief economist of Central Bank of UAE for the past 3 years. It was a great experience, and we were blessed with an amazing governor who wanted really to make the central bank one of the best central banks in the world. And with all what it means, and it actually has been a very interesting journey contributing to such a transformation. Just before, I used to be the chief economist for the Middle East as a European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD. It was based in London, and I was very happy actually that we managed to move the Middle East desk from London to Cairo to be able to cover from Morocco all the way to Lebanon. It was at a very interesting time of COVID to try to provide some policy advice to governments on how to cope with COVID. Was a very interesting period. And before that, I used to be as a Tasha Monetary Fund for a while in Washington, D.C. between 2006, 2012. And then, I was based in Monaco, where I was teaching at the University of Monaco. I've been teaching with them since maybe 2002 until now. So I never stopped teaching as a university, doing research, publishing. And I got my PhD from University of Nice, Sophia Antipolis in south of France, on exchange rates and exchange rates management and forecastings and policies. And before, my master was on international trade and free trade.
So this is super timely. You are the perfect guest. I mean, just to timestamp and date stamp today's. So it's almost 11 on the 15th of April. So the whole world went into shock 2 weeks ago on the 2nd of April. Can you please make sense of it for us?
Let me start actually with where the US is. It's very important to understand why the United States, not Trump, the United States is doing what they are doing. It might be a shocking policy, but the reality of the US economy is really shocking. When you listen to the president actually have a slogan, we're gonna make America great again. It means obviously America is not great anymore. And they know it. What does it mean that America is not great? There is one fundamental issue in the United States. Debt is out of control. Mm-hmm. Debt is 115%. It's huge. Debt service, interest on debt is huge. It's one of the biggest items in the budget. And it's growing. And this is a premises of a financial disaster, a debt crisis. They have been increasing the debt ceiling. You remember, they had deadlock at some time, and then they had an agreement on, we increased the ceiling from 80%, which was, back in 2009, a little bit higher, and then they meet again, higher, until when? So he comes as a businessman, and he sees the accounts, the budget, and it is certainly alarming. How can we handle such an issue? Because if you look at it, the US might be actually in a bankrupt situation. Debt by different means of calculation is unsustainable. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What to do? 2 things. The first one, the obvious one, budget reform. Cutting on expenditure, And that's why you see what...
the Doge.
Exactly what Elon Musk is doing is exactly on this vein. So we're going to just try to reduce spending as much as we can. We're going to lay off workers massively. Mm-hmm. And if we figure out that there is an issue, maybe we fire too many, maybe this is very tricky, we're going to hire them back. We fire 10, we hire 5. And we tell them, well, you are better off than being without a job. So eventually they will make me work much harder. And and you were going to hire back the best because they have the performance of all of them, and get them to work harder. So eventually we'll extract more productivity out of them. So the whole story is not trivial. They have a plan, they have an objective, and they need just to get the accounts and the budget back on track. But in economics, there is a concept called the twin deficits. Maybe we can just clarify what is this concept about, because sometimes we have too many twin crisis, twin deficit, twin this, twin that. So what is this twin deficit? Twin deficit is that the budget deficit in the US specifically, so it doesn't apply to many countries, but in the US specifically, equals what we call the current account deficit.
Okay.
Current account is the external transactions, the external relations, financial relation with the world, which it actually, we can narrow it down to trade deficit. See, so now we are coming to the tariff side. So where we're coming from? What is this twin deficit? If we can explain it, if you look at your entire budget as a nation, your entire income, total income of the country, this is called GDP, or sometimes gross national disposable income, the total, everything you receive. If you extract from it your consumption, from your income, you just take out your consumption, what is left is your saving, right? So your savings total as a nation usually equal your investment. So you save, and this money is used through different channels, banks, and so on, to be invested, okay? So this total saving in the IMF, we used to decompose it into two components. The private sector saving, us, private sector investment, and the government saving and the government investment. So when we say there's a budget deficit, it means that our spending is much more than our saving.
Okay.
So the government will consume, and then from the income, and then what is left, and they invest is higher than the saving, so they are in deficit.
In a deficit.
And they borrow. That's the government side. On the private sector side, if you think about it, banks are intermediates, and they just take our savings as deposits, and they have an interest in lending all this money. If they keep too much savings in their accounts and they give you an interest on your savings and they don't lend, they will lose money. So it doesn't make sense. So in this market, your banking sector, if they have too many savings and not too much investment, they want to give you an interest rate, so they will decrease the interest rate for you not to save as much and for investors to come and borrow. So the interest rate will always be going up and down. If you have too much demand for investment, not enough saving, they will increase the interest a little bit, so you save more, and investment can borrow and invest. So very often you will find on this private sector market, saving equal investment.
Okay.
Around what we call the equilibrium interest rate. It goes a little bit up, always to match saving equal investment. If saving is too much, interest rate will go a little bit down, and we will be always around the equilibrium. So if saving equal investment on the private sector, it means that saving minus investment equals zero. So what is left is that this external sector, the current account, because the GDP, if you want to tell a little bit, GDP, the total income of the country is consumed to consumption, investment, part of it is invested. Part that we didn't consume and we are selling overseas is our export. And part of our consumption that we are consuming, that we buy from abroad, is import. So the GDP equal consumption minus what we imported, plus what we invested, plus what we produce and sell abroad, which is export. So the X minus M here is trade. This is our trade deficit. So if we take the total income minus consumption, this is the saving, will equal investment plus trade. If you take the investment to the other side, so saving minus investment equal trade deficit. Okay. So the total, so if the private sector is equal to zero, this is the twin deficit. It means that it is the government saving minus investment, the budget deficit, that is equal the trade deficit. So if you are correcting one of the two sides, you also need to work very hard on correcting the other side, tariff. How can actually, not only tariff, how can we correct trade imbalance? I am importing in the US much more than what I'm exporting. How can I balance this? Exchange rate plays a role.
The devaluation of the dollar, which is happening right now.
Okay. So one thing is we need to devalue. They can't devalue actually. It's not a peg. It's not a nation. They need to orchestrate a depreciation of the currency. And then the market will make it happen or not. It's a different story. But eventually, what they need is a cheap dollar for the US goods to be cheaper. Compared to what? To euro, to yuan, to yen, to all other currencies. So they have to let the dollar depreciate vis-a-vis all other currencies. Okay, how to do this? This is one story, but it's difficult because it's just market demand.
The dollar is the reserve currency of the world.
Yeah.
So how can they do this?
Exactly. So they might just let you lose trust in the economy, saying, but if I invest in the US and the US is heading into a recession, I might be losing money. So I will better off not invest in the US in the coming 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
But isn't that a gamble?
It is. It is, certainly. But again, they are in a bankruptcy context and they want to save the economy. Huh?
Is there no other way?
There is.
Okay.
Tariffs. The most beautiful word in the day. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
You see, that's why actually the exchange rate alone is difficult to control.
Of course.
And it's a gamble. And you don't know. And actually, if it depreciates too much, it's also not healthy. If the international investors lose trust,
that's the key word.
That's the key word. Because actually, before the dollar was backed by gold,
yes,
all banknotes. Banknote actually meant that you can go to the bank with this note and take your gold back. That was how it was invented. So it's backed by nothing. Backed by the trust that the international community has in dollar. If they lose trust, it depreciates. If they lose it too much, it's an issue. And this is what happened actually in 1971, 1972, 1973, and led to the depeg of the dollar from gold.
Yes.
Loss of trust. Okay, so this might be something that might happen again now if investors start losing trust. But we're going to get to the dollar story, in a minute.
Okay.
The other way to try to correct for this imbalance is to go to each country with whom you have an imbalance and negotiate a deal that will make your export to these countries higher and eventually your import from these countries lower.
Everything is very clear and it makes logical sense. But then we go back to the fact that nothing is being produced much in the United States these days.
Very interesting question. Absolutely, very interesting point. I don't want to go to the military equipment in which...
No. We're talking about
because
face masks during COVID, for example. They had to import them from China, medications, chairs, consumable goods, like basic stuff, cars, so on and so forth. So everything is being imported.
Yeah, almost everything.
Almost everything.
Yeah, absolutely, a lot. But one thing that they are...
So basically, America is not the industrial powerhouse that it once was.
Absolutely.
In the 50s and the 40s and in the 60s. So by let's make America great again, do they want to start manufacturing stuff in the United States? I mean, is that the solution?
Well, it's one of, but... sorry if I have to say that, it's just my personal opinion.
You lived there for a very long time.
And I enjoyed the time I spent actually and interacting with American people to get the culture and to understand where they come from, and there is a huge difference between different parts of the US as well. And you can see it actually in the votes, but I feel just that I have a bad news. America will never be great again. It's over. It's over. It's just simple because it's just a cycle of life. All civilizations grow, prosper, and reach very high levels of development, and then they start flattening, declining, and they collapse. The Pharaohs, the Greeks, the Roman, you name it, the French, the British, and now the US. It's the end of the cycle. And you have an emergence of a strong power, which I believe, and many believe, is number one economic power worldwide, which is China. So it's a normal cycle of life. They reach a certain level of maturity, and they have been on the decline for some time. It's not new. Remember, we're going to make America great again with a slogan of Reagan. And Trump took it back, which means that it had been a while that they are struggling to try to find a way to recover. One of the fundamental issues for the West in general is the cost of labor.
Yes.
When you compare labor cost, everything else have the same cost kind of, it's international price. All the interest, all the raw material, What is different is the cost of labor. If they are able to produce cheaper in China, why would they produce in the US? And actually, if you put 150, 200, 300% tariff on China, for companies to leave China and to go back to the US, actually they go to India. Why they will go back to the US and they go 300% on India? Why they go to Singapore, to Indonesia, or where labor is cheap? Go to Egypt, where labor is cheap. This is a fact. So because we don't have this labor mobility,
Yes.
capital moves where cheap labor, qualified cheap labor is. Okay, so this is a fundamental issue, and certainly in the US, wages are not going to go down all the way to the level they are in China. So that's why, I think that reindustrializing the US is a far-fetched.
So then it's tariffs.
So why?
On what?
Exactly. It's not about putting tariff on sectors to bring them back to the US, even though that's what Trump is saying. If you listen to Trump, you get very easily confused because what he says today, he goes back tomorrow, and then he says, that was the original plan. It was all planned, fair enough.
Okay.
But what is behind all this? What does they want? Again, imagine that they want to strike a deal with Europe. We have a deficit with Europe, and we are buying from Europe more than what we are exporting to Europe. What can the US export to Europe that Europe needs? That's a question. Oil and gas. Drill, baby, drill. That was one part of his campaign slogan. And he said, we're going to be number one country in oil and gas production. We're going to flood the world and we're going to get it so cheap. He said that. He didn't say it because it was a joke. It's a plan. It's a plan. Okay, go to Europe. Okay, fine. You want us to remove the tariff and have zero tariffs between the US, and actually because he wanted to have a fair deal, he said. Which is, to be honest, it's not fair because Europe is putting some tariffs on US goods that US is not implementing. So there is no reciprocity somehow. So we're going to have zero tariff, but you're going to get your oil and gas from us. And then we're going to balance our trade deficit. We can come back to this later saying, what is the impact on the GCC?
It's not about the impact on the GCC. It's about the oil prices. So if he wants to actually flood the market with oil and gas, and if I remember correctly, for the shale producers in the US to start making money, the oil price has to be more than $65 a barrel.
Around 80, 65 to 80.
If I'm not mistaken.
That's true.
So I mean, if you do actually flood the market, then there's more supply than demand, and this is very simple economics. I'm not an economist, but even I can deduce that will bring the price of oil down.
Absolutely. But as the initial phase of drilling, this was very, very expensive. And this was during Obama's time, if you remember.
Yes.
It was a while ago.
Yes.
The 80 had to prevail for some time for the initial phase of, the heavy investment of drilling to take place. But then the operational cost of, now that you have all the equipment in place, the operational cost of extracting oil is much cheaper.
But it's still roughly around $60-65 a barrel for shale oil.
I think the operational cost is between, something like 35 and 45.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's acceptable, 40, 45.
Okay.
At this price, oil, I don't think it will go that low. Even though today is already, oil price is very low, but I don't think it will go that low. But if he floods, Saudi Arabia cannot respond, for example, by competing by flooding even more, because Saudi Arabia break-even oil price is around 90, 80, because they are spending massively on infrastructure. Much less for the UAE, around 50. So they can cope. So it depends on the country. Who will suffer the most actually are small, emerging African oil producers who need 80, 90 on average to have a sustainable budget balance, if you like. This is what they need. So they will suffer a lot. But even if they just reach again an agreement with the Saudis, with the Emiratis, on a new quotas and a new distribution, because we, the US, we need to sell more. We need to sell more because we are in deficit. We have a budget deficit, and we need to correct for it through domestic measures and trade deals. So this would one item.
So oil and gas is with Europe, with China.
Yeah, so that's why actually, if you see that he paused everything,
Yes.
except with China. China is a real threat. Not the real threat because China is kind of playing an unfair trade game with the US. Not at all, actually. If you look at it, and it's very interesting to see this example, China is exporting to the US and Europe, let's say. Okay. If it was an exchange rate that makes Chinese goods cheap, when the dollar depreciates against the euro appreciates, euro can buy much more goods in dollar,
Yes.
and much more goods in yuan, renminbi. They can buy much more from China. But export to Europe, even when euro is very strong, were low compared to the export to the US. It is the US consumer, the US market, with a very strong appetite to consume Chinese goods. Why? Because actually very early, the US companies went to China to produce in China for the US consumers. European companies went to Eastern Europe to produce for the European market. So it was not the same setup. So what Trump is trying to do today is to push the US company to move out of China. Maybe to come back to the US, maybe not. But the fact that they are going out of China will weaken China, which means that all these products taking place in China will now be in India, will be in different countries. And so the balance with China will decrease. China will not be exporting as much to the US in a different way. So you see the idea? So by if I'm not doing well, but I can hurt my neighbor and he will be worse off, I'm happy. If I can gain, but he will gonna gain more than me, I'm not happy, actually. That's the idea of Trump deals, you see? So let me weaken China. China is very strong. China is very powerful. Let's go back to this imbalance, between.
Yes.
So you have one country have a big deficit, the US, and one country with a big surplus. This is called the mercantilist, approach.
Yes.
So China is selling a lot, much more than what they consume. What do? They accumulate reserves. Every year, they have 300-400 billion of reserves, additional reserves. What do they do with it? They invest in US Treasury bills and bonds, right? So eventually they are financing the US deficit.
Yes.
So the US is dependent on China to finance its deficit. It's tricky. You don't want that. So we don't want them to have this so huge surplus to be able to invest. If they don't invest in the US, what else do? They invest in Africa. They increase their power, they increase their leverage, they have ports all over the world, they become stronger, more powerful. They develop their military apparatus and they become a threat, or nobody, and the US doesn't want this. They want to remain a superpower. They don't want to see China emerging. So they have to erode this surplus in a way or another. So even if they just deter investment and get them to move out of China, go anywhere else, to the US, ideally, but if not to the US, anywhere else, China is weaker.
It's actually working.
Yeah, of course. 150% tariffs. It's just huge. And investors, and also the communication is very important because they say, this is there to stay. And Chinese reaction of putting tariff on the US goods might not be as useful because actually they are not importing that much from the US, number one. And what an announcement was made, I don't know if you have noticed it, is that they gave instruction to the Chinese banks to reduce their demand on dollar. Okay, so now the trade war will eventually evolve into a currency war. It's very dangerous. We're getting into...
What is a currency war?
So they will just try to make the US dollar not trustworthy, and eventually get the international community not to use dollar anymore as a mean of transaction. And Trump said very clearly, it's in a very strict way, if any country decide to sell or invoice in any currency other than the dollar, they're going to be severely punished. And this one actually was serious about it, because this is a dominant power for the US, having the US dollar in as a mean of transaction, across the globe in all invoicing.
But the BRICS already started.
Absolutely. So now this might accelerate. But guess what? What happens when Chinese demand for dollar decline? What will happen to the US dollar? It will depreciate, which is what Trump wants. So we go back to the exchange rate aspect of it. And so Chinese reaction goes somehow in the direction of what the US wants. Well, fine, cool. Keep doing it, but not too much. That's why, it's not the entire world is going to suddenly shift from using the US dollar. That's why he was very strict.
It's impossible. And even if the whole world wanted, I think it will take at least 5 to 10 years. No? You're the expert.
Yeah. Everything can happen very fast, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, everything can happen very fast. China had been accumulating gold for a while. So they have very large gold reserves. What if tomorrow they decide to announce and go out to the world and say, you know what? Now we are backing our currency with gold. And you are welcome to use our currency as a medium of exchange, and we guarantee the convertibility to gold.
They would never do that.
As they said they would do that several times. They will never do it. Now they are in a trade war. It's not the same context. Huh? We don't know what they can do. But if they do, after a year, 5 years, 10 years, this one. So one thing could be Chinese reaction.
Doctor, after the 90 days, the pause that President Trump put, what will happen? And how are we here in the region affected?
Within the 90 days, he will have deals. He will meet with every single country, and he will decide how they're going to rebalance trade. So we're going to export more oil and gas to Europe, maybe. We're going to do this. We're going to go to each country and tell them, well, you need to buy this from us. And it's already studied. So they didn't just come up with this list of countries out of nowhere. He's not starting in Canada and Mexico without knowing exactly what he needs from each one of them. So this pause is going to be the negotiation phase. If you get to a deal, and if you remember his son when he posted, that the first one to get the deal is going to be the best deal. So it's all about deal. Just make the deal.
Yeah.
Go do the deal. So it's going to be this negotiation phase, after which some countries will see some tariff because they didn't find the right deal that satisfies the US. And satisfies the US, again, if you want to understand what type of deals they want to make, look at the discussions that they had with Ukraine. And it will tell you how they handle deals. Very tough negotiation, and they very often get what they want. So they already have a plan. They want to take this type of minerals from this country, these types of selling this type of goods to this country, and they will strike this deal to make America great again, to be able to have control on some raw materials that are essential for new technologies, AI development, and. So this will be the 90 days transition. And the fact that they kept everything on China except some goods, today, so this morning, we found out that there are 20 items that are exempted from this, including some computers, some iPhones, some mobile phones, some stuff. So we will see, even with China, if they're going to be able to strike a deal. At some point of time, I was invited in a panel, and I was just saying, when you come to this flattening cycle and you are in a decline, which I believe the US, where it is right now, and you have an emerging power like China. It reminds me when, at the end of the British Empire and the emergence of the US as being the superpower. So either actually in history, you become into a conflict and it's going to be a big war, big conflict between the two powers, the one that is declining, the one that is emerging, or they will find a collaboration like what happened between British and American, and they had a very strong collaboration. Even today, I believe, UK is doing better than anybody else, and they might get the best deal and the first deal, and because they are very strong allies.
Of course.
So maybe the business communities between China and the US will find a way to make this new transition from the US power to the Chinese power being very smooth, with China being a superpower and the US being a very strong ally, or not. So the other case will be very dangerous. So this coming 90 days, we will see all these deals happening. How it will impact
Our Middle East
MENA
region.
Yeah, the Middle East region. MENA is two different regions, actually. So you have the Gulf, the GCC.
Of course.
It's
Where we live.
yeah, and they have a different economic structure, environment, and so on. And you have the other countries. Look at Egypt. Egypt is a very important country in the region. Extremely weak, extremely indebted, struggling with tourism, because tourism needs stability. And when you see a regional war on the border, things happening, and potentially instability in Sinai, so you don't want to go to dive in Sharm el-Sheikh, you don't want to go. So it's difficult. So tourism plunged, took a big hit. Since COVID, it never really recovered well. Suez Canal. The Houthi just made it extremely difficult to navigate through the Red Sea. So the Suez Canal revenue dropped by 1/5. So in Egypt, the Egyptian economy is very, very weak, highly indebted, and unable to find a way. Without the $36 billion investment from UAE, Egypt would have certainly been bankrupt. And we talk about the exchange rate. It went from 10 years ago, $1 was equal to something like £8. Now it's 50. So you can just understand the magnitude. So one country like Egypt might suffer a lot. And no wonder that the United States is putting a pressure for Egypt to give part of its land, national sovereignty, give part of your land to Palestinians. Very difficult time. So the negotiations are going to be very tough. And I know they are very tough. And in these difficult times, regional support is essential. Egypt alone cannot stand the pressure. This is very delicate, very difficult context. Same with Jordan. Okay, the same context. They are weak economically, and they are under lots of pressure. And then if you move a little bit far away and you go to Morocco, Morocco have been doing very well. And Morocco have very strong ties with the US, and they have a free trade agreement with the US and with Europe. It's a gateway to Africa. So most probably, Morocco is not really threatened by anything. They don't have a huge trade deficit. They don't export more to the US than what they import more from the US. Will do well, and they will just use this very subtle diplomacy to achieve some economic gains out of all this, and reassuring the US that they can play a role of facilitator of the US entry with their investment into Africa, again, to balance the Chinese investments in Africa. So each country will be a little bit different, if you like. But if we go to the GCC and we go back to this baby drill, and they want to really produce oil massively and export oil massively. US is exporting a lot. When Biden came to see the Saudi Crown Prince asking them to increase production to get oil price down to help with inflation. The answer was very simple. The US companies are exporting massively. Ask them not to export. Put a tariff on their export for them to supply domestically, and oil price domestically will drop. Why do you have us to pay the price, for your company? Yeah. So it doesn't make sense, So, but here, if they manage to strike deals with different countries, telling them, we want you to buy our oil, or we're going to put on you some 20, 30, 40, 50 tariff. And these countries need the US as a market. Otherwise, their industry might collapse. Unemployment will increase, and poverty will increase, and they don't want that. So they might be more inclined to say, okay, fine. Fair enough. We don't care from who are buying oil. We're going to buy from the US, and we're going to be friends. And then you can open your market, and we can sell more, and so on. We're going to have stronger ties. This might impact the quantity, not the price eventually, but maybe the price as well, but the quantity of oil and gas exported from the region. From which country? It will also depend on the deals that they have individually with each country. And we have seen, for example, the UAE having a delegation not too long ago, Sheikh Tahnoun going to the US and negotiating deals to invest significant investments in AI, in new technologies, something the US is keen about having investments in. So it's a very interesting collaboration. We become partners to the extent that Trump said, actually, maybe, in my trip outside of the US, maybe the UAE might be the first stop. Saudi wanted to be the first stop. No, it is the first stop. You see, yeah, it tells that the deal appealed to him big time. So each country will have to go and try to strike the best deal with the US. They need investments, they need this, they need materials, they need, and they will have to strike a balance. Those who are going to be, getting the deal that the US wants will get a lot of support, including military support. Sometimes, just supplying some military equipment, first generation jet fighters and things like this is a negotiation tool. Okay, fine. You need this? Well, we want that, and let's have this deal. So it's a big negotiation that will take place all over the world with a country by country, and even within the region, each country might be better off or worse off depending on how they will strike this deal. So the deal.
Deal. Yeah, it's very interesting. So with all these negotiations, when the whole tariffs things was announced, and a few days later we had the stock market crash, and roughly $6-7 trillion worth of value were lost. Can we expect something like this to happen in the near future, or is it more stable now and markets will not overreact again to another tariff war?
Absolutely. No, I think the market will not overreact anymore. The pause and the negotiations that will take place during this period will show the market where we are heading. Actually, the market, I remember back in time, when Trump was elected, someone asked me, so what do you think, what should we invest in? I said, VIX, buy the volatility, because it's going to be bumpy all the way, It's going to be unbelievable, because it's just, he himself speaks about himself like this, and that he's being a little bit erratic, unpredictable. And in negotiations, sometimes it helps, because you don't know what to expect from him. Okay, now that's even his team. Is the Treasury minister, when he's asked about, what do you think? I don't know. I have no idea. So he's not aware exactly of what is. It's just erratic. We don't know. So the entire world is waiting for a word. And the market actually reacted very negatively to all this, because uncertainty is the enemy of investment. Huh? We want to have clarity, we want to have visibility. Even if it's a negative, we will have tariffs, Okay, fine. Once we know that we're going to have a trade war, and that many of the US companies who are relying on input from China are going to get hurt, their sales are going to decline, so the profit is going to decline, so the share price declines, and it becomes a speculation. So, the first one to sell will make the least loss, so it's actually overselling and coming from a peak of the market where was the highest in history. So there is a correction, so let's sell. So it was a market correction somehow, a panic for sure. But now with this 90 days pause, I think it was just, okay, fine. Actually, the market actually reacted very positively to the pause. Yes. Yeah. So, okay. We paused the trade war. Now it's only China. Let's see how things will unfold, which companies are exposed, what goods are exported. 20 items have been removed. So those guys are not going to be losing as much as we expected. So the market will just, trying to reshift all this analysis. Some will be stable, some will be a little bit more volatile. Some share prices we will be convinced on the medium long term they're going to be losing. Because these are the companies that are heavily exposed to Chinese market in one way or another, and we're going to see how all this will unfold in the coming weeks, months. And I don't think that we'll see too many surprises from Trump. So the surprise time is kind of a little bit over. The rest will be now having surgical changes and doing this announcement, just to make sure that we are getting the deal with each country as we want it to be. And the market will be, it's not going to be euphoric, but it will be just in a wait and see mode. So it'll be a little bit quiet before the storm.
So a storm?
Eventually, yes.
Because of a dollar devaluation, or because of...
because Chinese reaction to all this is still also a little bit unpredictable.
Okay.
Do they feel powerful enough to stand fully to the US and say, fine, we're going to put the tariff. Actually, if we maintain the tariff as they are, the US is losing more than China.
How so?
Yeah, absolutely.
How so?
Because actually, it's mostly of the products that are imported from China are consumer goods.
Yes.
So certainly, there is no substitute for these goods in the US today.
So it will increase inflation, basically.
For sure.
And Trump wants interest rates to go down, but if inflation goes up, interest rates will not go down. So
yeah, and if interest doesn't go down, the cost of borrowing will remain high. Refinancing the actual debt, which big part of it is coming to maturity, is going to be high. So it's against his will. So if China stands, still and perfect, put 200% actually. We're going to put a tariff on export to the US.
It's like an Ouroboros. It's a snake which is eating itself.
Yeah. So that's why from the beginning, all economists said, this is not wise.
No, it's not.
Trade war is never good for anybody. Actually, it's a lose-lose at the end of the day. So we'll see how Chinese will react. They haven't yet overreacted for the time being.
Okay, so since there could be an overreaction, or there could not be an overreaction, what would your suggestion be or advice to investors and to sovereign wealth funds, especially here in the region?
In the region, to invest in the region, you mean? Or investment all over the world?
Investment all over the world.
Buckle up.
Buckle up.
Buckle up. Look very carefully at what this negotiation and what the US wants from each country. Let's look at the European example.
In the EU, yes.
So what did Trump ask from the European? That, we spend too much money on protecting you. You're going to protect yourself. Okay.
Which
so you're going to be investing
now? An army?
Yeah. So yeah, can you even believe that we are talking about having huge tariffs and Germany building an army? These are things that we have never thought that we'll never talk about again.
We're going back to the 1930s. That's like almost 100 years ago.
It's very
history repeating itself.
Absolutely. I hope not.
Me too. I hope not. But if we take a look at what's going on in the world, it's
extremely.
We're going back to like old traditions, which is rather weird.
We never learn from.
No, we don't.
From our mistakes.
This is humanity's greatest flaw, I guess.
This is unbelievable.
Sorry, I cut you off.
No, absolutely. No, actually, it's very true what you are saying, because I'm really worried, and I have been speaking to some friends of mine who are really have been in politics for the past, something like 60 years, so they are really old and wise.
Yes.
And they say that actually, when they look at the future, and they say, 10 years from now, they are afraid that we're going to be looking back and say, we were on a crossroad and we took the wrong direction. So they feel very worried about where we are heading to. What is happening in Europe, a war in Europe, between Ukraine and Russia, that eventually might expand. What is happening in the Middle East. It's unbelievable. So all these are very negative signs on where we are heading, including tariff, trade war, currency war, new coalitions happening, Germany building an army, European highly indebted, borrowing 100 billion to invest in military equipment and development. Do they have time to build a new military technology? What are you doing? It's gonna be, how long it will take? But anyway, if they are really keen on doing this and do it in Europe, so most probably investing in companies, French and others, who are specialized in this type of equipment might be wise, and striking collaboration, investing and having a share of knowledge to have part of this know-how of military production transfer to the region. All this can happen, especially that the region, especially the Gulf, have deep pockets, so they can invest in these companies and have this share of of knowledge.
And for companies like ours that do not invest in military and will never
No, I was
invest
just
in
giving you just
military.
as an example, but if you listen to what is happening and you're aware of the discussions, you might see, okay, this is a sector that is flourishing. But for a company like yours, think about it. If some of the Chinese products are to be delocalized from China, this type of technology, whom else can produce it? If Apple tomorrow decides to do the assembly of iPhones outside of China, where can they go? What are the options? What will be the cheapest option? Which companies can produce in this? And eventually we find actually there are, 3, 4, 5 companies worldwide. If you invest in all of them to start with, you will never be wrong. But if then later on you focus on the ones that really get to sign an agreement with Apple, so certainly they will make profit and so on. So that will be one example of picking some of the companies, saying that, okay, China might be on the decline, investment in Chinese companies, China as a whole nation, maybe not. But investment in China, in Chinese companies might be on decline, which reminds me of what happened in Southeast Asian countries in 1994, 1995, when China became the destination to go. So they left Indonesia, Malaysia, and the collapse, the Southeast Asian crisis was due to this. They just left these countries, went to China. So now they're going to leave China and go to these countries, to India and to other regions of the world. Maybe some African countries are
South America.
South America, absolutely. So
Egypt, maybe even.
And Egypt. It depends on the product. If it's labor intensive, so Egypt might just get part of it, depending on the knowledge and know-how. If it's technology intensive, so maybe India and other countries, South Korea might get a better share. So you will see this outflow of investment from China and from companies, certain companies, on which administration will just be putting the amount of pressure. And then you will be able to see, and even actually in the UAE, some technology company will certainly boom, big time. So we just, you have to be now very, very active on the analysis and understanding where the company risk in China will be and what will be the alternative for those multinational investors where they can go to, and it's going to pay off in the short term, big time. Short term I mean 3-5 years.
That's very interesting, and thank you for the advice, Doctor. We can spend another 2-3 hours talking. I mean, I still have a lot of discussion points, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. I hope this is the first of many.
I hope so.
It's been a pleasure to welcome you on the Multipliers Podcast.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to come back anytime you like.
Thank you.
Thank you.